Good evening, everyone. I am Amy Rogan, the Wilkin Chair this year for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at the University of Findlay. The title of the Wilkin series this year is Journalism and Democracy, the Ethical Responsibility of the Fourth Estate. This is a topic that is a passion of mine for so many reasons. I am a journalist. I worked in TV news for 15 years and as a print journalist for 6 years. I've been teaching journalism since 2009. Over that time, so much has changed in our industry, but the contribution of a free press to a democracy never changes. It is crucial for a functioning democracy. So the issue is what journalism looks like to the voters, what journalism really is, and what it should not be. I've been very excited about tonight's guest and honored to have him with us live from Arizona via Zoom. I worked with Jim Heath for a few years before I left TV. He was our political correspondent as I was the assistant news director at the Ohio News Network. While most political reporters have a passion for politics, Jim was different in my view. It wasn't just a passion, he lived and breathed politics. It was not just a beat he cared about, it was and is part of his core. So since he left TV news, he has written a number of books, which I have scattered around on the tables there. He's also produced documentaries and podcasts, and if you follow his YouTube channel, which you can find on the QR code on the program sheets, bio sheets there on the table, you'll see he's been putting together a periodic electoral map since January, right?
For this election year in January.
Since January. So welcome, Jim. I'll let you take over here, and you can explain to us, what you think a political reporter is and so many other things, how it's evolved and all that good stuff.
Very good. Amy, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you to the University of Findlay. I was born 45 minutes away in Van Wert, Ohio. My grandparents, both sides, moved there. My parents were born there, graduated from high school there. My dad went to Ohio Northern, got his pharmacy degree. And then in their 30s, they decided they'd had one too many winters. And instead of moving south to Florida like every other Ohioan, they moved west to Arizona. And that's where I've ended up back in my career. I must apologize. I was going to put on a long sleeve shirt for this evening out of respect to you all. I know it's a nice October evening in Ohio, but if I step out the door behind the green screen right here, it is still 97 degrees. So you'll forgive me if I still have a short sleeve shirt on because it is still awfully warm in this part of the country. I wanted to, I prepared a kind of a statement, an opening statement, and I'm not going to read directly from it because I can summarize it in one word, and that word is truth. That's why I hope most of you are here tonight. I hope that's why those of you who want to be journalists, either in print or in broadcast, I hope that's why you're getting into the profession. Truth is the bottom line. It is the truth, the way you uncover factual information and report it. And it's really quite simple. Now, I must say that in my broadcast career, I had the opportunity to cover 3 different states, Arizona, South Carolina, and Ohio. During my time in Ohio at WBNS and ONN, I covered Governor Strickland and Governor Kasich. When I left my broadcasting career as an anchor in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the local Democrats and Republicans both had a going away party for me. I don't know whether it was to celebrate my coverage or they were just glad that I was leaving. But both political parties joined together to bid me farewell. And the same thing when I left Ohio. The WBNS newsroom, we had members of Congress from both political sides and video messages from both Senator Brown and Senator Rob Portman. The point is that in my career, I always thought of myself as a referee. And there are going to be time periods where, as a political journalist in particular, you cover events, and sometimes a Democratic official is going to get in trouble. Sometimes a Republican official is going to get in trouble, or the parties, or causes that are associated with one side or the other. And you just have to tell the truth about what's happening the best way you can. At the end of your career, At the end of your time, hopefully you'll have both political parties commending you for what they perceive as fair coverage when they objectively look back. I think of all the flags that I threw during the Strickland administration and all the flags that I threw as a referee during the Kasich administration. And I got to be honest, I long for that time period. I stepped out of my professional broadcasting career right at the beginning of the Trump era. And I think that, you need a serious discussion of exactly what we've been doing the last 10 years and how we're going to survive it as journalists. Always before the last decade, both parties recognized when they did something wrong. They would usually deny it, and then under immense pressure, they would admit it. Sometimes an apology would get them out of trouble. Sometimes an apology was not enough. But both sides played by the similar rules that as a referee, as a journalist, you could cover the game fairly, again, based on the facts that you had. Today, we're in an era where one side, one team, if you will, if you try to referee this game, one side is convinced that they're always right, that they cannot lose, that they are never wrong. And if you question them on it, you're fake news, you're not credible, and no one should listen to you. And that's a problem because if you put yourself in a referee jersey and you go to a game where one team is not going to abide by the rules and they're not going to care when you throw a flag, that's troubling. I was thinking before we went on tonight that it really is troubling when you put it in that context. But from a historical context, I reminded myself that for the first 100 years in our country, the only way that journalism got published, and there was no social media, there were no cell phones, there was not even radio, it was just newspaper. And primarily those newspapers were run by very wealthy individuals who could afford to print things. And so for the first 100 years in our country, we literally did not have a press that we recognize and value today. The first 100 years of our country basically were partisan publications. The Arkansas Democrat, the Arizona Republican, they didn't even try to hide the fact that they were partisan for a cause or a political party on one side or the other. And then exactly 100 years ago, we formed the canons of journalism, where journalists got together and said, you know what, we need a new way of doing this. We need to be referees. We need to be free from the pressure of corporate and just cover local politics in the best way we can, as fairly as we can. And over a period of time, respect was gained. And up until the Watergate situation, the press pretty much, we were doing a good job and we were highly regarded and recognized by both political parties on both sides of the aisle. What's changed now is that lack of respect. And what the challenge will be for those of you that are young that want to go into journalism, either newspaper or broadcast, is that it comes back to what we started with, truth. And the question for you will be whether you can maintain telling the truth without the pressure of one side denying that you're telling the truth, combined with the corporate pressure of having the freedom to tell the truth. As an example, the corporate ownerships of our local TV stations, if they're in a red state, and just as an example, if Donald Trump is saying something that isn't factually correct, if you as a reporter want to point that out, maybe your corporate owners are going to be hesitant over a period of time to continue doing that, because what is the financial interest of a corporation to fact check in an area where people don't want those facts? And so there might be pressure coming from the top. I never faced that, luckily, in my career, but that might be a factor. And a second thing I'll say is that there are now corporations that own local news, and I'm thinking of Sinclair Broadcasting in particular, where their whole objective is to tilt coverage that they produce out of a headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then mandate all of their local TV stations. We're not talking networks here. We're talking local TV stations. They mandate them that they air the reports that are being produced in Washington that have a obvious kind of a Fox News tilt to the right. And that's happening all across the country now. Sinclair owns, I think, 150, if not more, local TV stations. So they have a partisan bent that's being mandated from their corporate headquarters, and those news reports are airing right next to your local weatherman. So those are a couple of the pressures that I see that are building for journalists that are coming along. And the question will be whether truth can survive or whether we're going to go back to the first 100 years of our country, where only those that have the money and the power to own media interests will be putting out what they view as their truths, and there will not be room for those of us who try to stand in the middle and try to call it right down the middle. And so, with that, and with the knowledge that truth is our sort of our reference word tonight, I'd be happy to entertain any of your questions. And again, Amy, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to ask a few questions of my own, and then we'll get to a point where we'll open up to you guys if you want to ask a question. And if that's the case, we'll have you come up, but I'll let you know when we're there. Okay. So you mentioned the local journalism angle, Jim. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of local journalism in elections, how some of your local interviews, your local stories ended up in very big headlines, landing you in what you call in your book covering Mitt in the eye of the firestorm. So can you give us some background, explain what that was like when a local interview goes national?
Yeah, that's right at the beginning of, this is the 2012 campaign. I was covering President Obama and Vice President Biden, along with Mitt Romney, the Republican opponent of Obama, and his running mate Paul Ryan. I was basically covering one of the four of them for the entire year of 2012. That's how important Ohio was 12 years ago in presidential elections. And I had a sit-down interview with Mitt Romney at one point during the campaign. And I asked him a question about an abortion measure that was happening, a vote that was happening in the U.S. Senate. And Romney answered it to his way of thinking incorrectly and didn't catch it. And I actually did a follow-up thinking that he probably wanted to correct himself, and he didn't. What I have surmised at this point, looking back in hindsight, is that I was a local journalist. He was on cruise control. He wasn't really paying that close of attention to the question, and he ended up opposing the Blunt-Rubio amendment. And a few hours later, he was forced to go back on media and say that he had misunderstood the question. But those several hours was a real foreshadowing of the social media age that is now just part of covering somebody, that it's instantaneous. I got back to the newsroom in Columbus after that interview with Mitt Romney, and I sent out a tweet saying that he opposed the Blunt-Rubio bill. Within probably 3 minutes, the national political reporters had retweeted that. They started calling the Romney campaign. And I just sat back and watched in amazement as Twitter took over. It became literally a tornado of information. And of course, the Democrats went crazy because they thought they had found an issue that they could use against Romney. So everybody jumped in. And I just sat back for several hours before I went live again to talk about the interview and what had been said and what had happened, and watched the proliferation of this news story completely leave my hands. My authorship as a journalist, my scoop, if you will, completely was out of my hands, and it was in the hands of just about anybody else. Today, it's even much worse. It's not just X now. You can have TikTok videos within 30 seconds or a minute that younger generation is watching religiously, along with a few of us that are a little bit older. But social media now has become an instantaneous part of the game, and it's impossible to put the genie back in the bottle when something gets out of it. So I do think that if there's a lesson here, it goes back to what I just want to emphasize over and over again tonight. The truth. The truth was, I had an interview with Mitt Romney, and he said what he said. That's my truth as a reporter, and that's how I reported it. The fact several hours later he had to go live on Boston media to deny it and to claim that he had misunderstood my very clear question to him, that's up to him. That's up to the politician at that point. But at least to Romney's credit, later on, as I wrote that book about Mitt Romney and covering him both in 2008 and 2012, he offered an apology, saying, I just simply missed that question, and he took responsibility for it. That's what most politicians do, Republican or Democrat. When you get into a time period where a politician can never make a mistake and will never admit any wrongdoing, that's where all of a sudden the system begins to buckle and it doesn't work near as efficiently.
Great. Yeah, I remember watching all that happen too. Did you ever regret asking that question or tweeting that tweet?
Of course not. Because it was being voted on the next day. The Blunt-Rubio amendment was very controversial. Rick Santorum was Mitt Romney's primary opponent. Super Tuesday was coming up. Ohio was part of Super Tuesday. Santorum had used that amendment as a wedge with Romney. So he should have known it was coming. I think that if they had to do it over again, clearly he would have been paying closer attention. But the question was, it was one of many within the 15 minutes that you're allotted. Usually with these national politicians, when they come through locally, you're given 10 or 15 minutes. You try to get as many questions in as possible to see what will be the most interest and the best story out of it. And so that was a question that I asked about halfway through my time period. Again, I did a follow-up on it, though, because in the back of my mind, I thought that he was trying to moderate a little bit. I thought he was trying to get away from the sort of the far right on the Republican Party, and I found it surprising that he was doing that before the primary had happened. But when he didn't take the bait on the follow-up question, I just simply moved on. And when I tweeted, to be honest, Amy, I wasn't sure what I had. I thought I had a change of position, but I didn't know that the firestorm or the ding that was going to create on the Romney campaign. And I certainly don't regret it. It was a question that he should have known was coming.
Do you ever look back and there's a moment that you did miss that you wish you had asked a question?
Oh, I think that there are gut intuitions that you use. John Edwards comes to mind. I was covering the Edwards campaign in 2008. People might recall he was John Kerry's vice presidential nominee in 2004. So he was the front runner for the 2008 Democratic nomination for a while. He was running against Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And there was an intuition that things were not going well in his home life. My photographer and I, covering him a couple different times, noticed that he and his wife they never held hands. There seemed to be body chemistry that was off. And as it turned out, what he and she both knew is that he had been cheating on her and he'd actually fathered a child with another woman. And that ended his political career eventually, and it took the National Enquirer to break that story. But, a very cautious question could have been what Elizabeth's role was going to be, not only in the campaign, but in the White House, and I could have probably poked around that a little bit better. That's just simply one that got missed. But on the big issues, the big campaigns, you know what the topics are, and you know usually what the candidates are going to say. So when Romney went off script and gave a different answer, it was just a question of why is he positioning himself this way? That's how I looked at it. I didn't realize it was a mistake. And
so can you think of a campaign where journalism played a bigger role than normal, if that's possible? I don't know if that's really something that is possible, but can you, where did journalism have influence on campaigns?
I think that, let's go back. Let's think about 1988 as an example, where George Bush, the vice president, is 17 points behind Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee, at the time of the conventions. How did George Bush go from being 17 points behind and considered a complete lightweight as Ronald Reagan's vice president to winning a landslide blowout election? And I think part of that was shaped by the press narrative of Dukakis during the fall that bought into the Bush attempt to make Dukakis appear extremely weak. In hindsight, Dukakis wasn't really weak. He was a technocrat, and he was just highly technical. But the Bush attempt to paint him as weak offered opportunities for the press to kind of buy into that narrative. One thinks of Michael Dukakis. He was the governor of Massachusetts, and he didn't have a lot of military experience. And so during the campaign, he was invited to get into a tank. And they handed him a helmet. And as he told the story afterwards, he said, "I don't want to wear that." But they insisted that if he wanted to get in the tank, he had to wear the helmet. And he did, and it was unfortunate because he looked like a cartoon character with this grinning face and this great big helmet that was on his, giving a thumbs up on the tank. But the press bought into that. We made that a top story. We fed into the narrative that he was in over his head. And I think the press helped with the Bush campaign that fall in kind of recreating Bush's image while damaging or dinging Dukakis's image. Another example, Barack Obama, was kind of the celebrity candidate in 2008. And I think that because the economy was so bad and because George W. Bush was so unpopular, I mean, Bush's approval rating when he left office was like 23%. I think that it was easy to kind of buy into that and not challenge that to any degree. And I think that Obama kind of skated by on some of the big issues because of the other dynamics that were going on. I want to make it clear, I don't think it's the press's fault. I think that, again, if we give truthful, factual information, even if it doesn't have to do all the time with their policy on the border, but might have to do whether they plagiarized a speech, or whether they've done something that might be of more interest to people than actual policy, I don't think that we should be ashamed of that. We should just offer that to the American people and let them digest it and see what they want to do with it. But I think that those are a couple of campaigns where the press kind of aided the campaign of one candidate against another.
So this is clearly the most historical campaign, and I feel like we've been saying that like every year of the presidential election. But we have two candidates, who one was the oldest ever to run, and then the incumbent, he drops out, and now we have another candidate who's a woman, which is fairly unusual, and she takes over with only 102 days left, right, for the campaign.
Right.
Is there anything in history that has come close to something like this? Have we, maybe that we're not quite aware of, but has there been anything like this?
Well, not in recent memory, but elections were decided oftentimes at the political conventions. As an example, Abraham Lincoln was nominated in 1860 from a big field of other Republicans, and it wasn't determined until they actually got to Convention Hall. In 1956, Adlai Stevenson refused to name a running mate. So he told delegates to the Democratic Convention, you choose. I don't, give me whoever you want. And so the delegates went crazy. And on live television at the convention, Estes Kefauver, who was a senator from Tennessee, was nominated against John F. Kennedy. And it was the only political campaign that John F. Kennedy ever lost. He lost to Estes Kefauver for vice president in 1956 by just a handful of delegates. It's a good thing that he did because that ticket went down to a flaming defeat. And of course, Kennedy came right back 4 years later and was the Democratic nominee and got elected. But in recent times, the thought of an incumbent president giving up when he had already secured renomination before the convention, no, I don't think we'll ever see it again. Haven't seen it before. Very, very historic, and we still don't know exactly what Joe Biden was thinking, whether he felt he was forced out or whether his family, had a serious conversation with him. As you know, Amy, I've dealt with my mom, who recently passed, and she dealt with cognitive issues and dementia for several years. And I had been doing podcasts since January of this year, warning Democrats that Biden was not the same Biden. But nobody was seeing it until that debate when everyone saw it. But I was seeing the signs in him, being a political junkie and news junkie like I am. He was really worrying me, and I started doing podcasts in January saying, this is this is not going to work. I just don't think that the American people are going to elect somebody who is so clearly dealing with cognitive issues. And so we don't know. We don't know whether Biden has ever admitted that or not. But what we do know is that historically, he did something that, frankly, I think history will find amazing, whether you like Joe Biden or not, whether you politically agree with Joe Biden or not. He gave up the most powerful position on the planet Earth, and he did it voluntarily. And that's just an amazing, amazing thing. He had the nomination. He could have run the top of the Democratic Party, insisted on it. And I think that it would have been a blowout, because I don't think sensible people would have thought that could be sustained. His mental abilities could be sustained for another 4 years, let alone another year. And so, he did an amazing thing by bailing out. And again, I don't think we'll ever see that again in our lifetimes.
In the Washington Post, I think it was, I can't remember if it was today or yesterday, came out with a story about fact-checking and how the Trump campaign has been insisting on no fact-checking whenever they do interviews, when they did the debate. As everybody probably remembers, J.D. Vance said, remember, we agreed no fact-checking. And the Post makes note of, the fact that they counted, Trump made over 30,000 false or misleading statements while he was in office, at 21 a day. So my question for you is, do you think the mainstream media, which some people think is a dirty word, to me, or dirty phrase, I think it's professionally trained journalists, do you think how do you think they're doing covering his campaign?
I think some of them have given up. And I think that they've given up covering, again, coming back to the key word of tonight, truth. It's just, if you're a credentialed journalist, particularly a political reporter in this context, your only job is to tell the truth based on the facts that you see. And if that means accusing one campaign or one politician of lying every time you report on whatever subject that happens to be, then so be it. And he and his team might be constantly upset, but at the end of the day, you go home and you look at yourself in the mirror and you just look at yourself and say to yourself, I told the truth. That is factually correct. What I reported today was factually correct. Okay. Now, the question for the future will be, as I mentioned at the beginning, whether the corporation that you work for, the corporate entity that owns, that gives you your paycheck, whether they're going to be strong enough, particularly in areas where, in this particular case, Trump and Republicans are very strong, whether it's going to be financially worth it to them to continually fact check. Mm-hmm. It might reach a point where the general manager is like, I'm getting so much pressure from the community, they don't want the truth, and I don't want to see it on our local news. That's a real possibility.
Okay.
But as a journalist, as somebody who goes in, I think that you're going to have to make the call as an up-and-coming journalist of ethically where you want to stand in this fight.
Right.
And if the canons of journalism, if we are the fourth estate, and again, I'll remind you, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that journalism is the fourth estate.
Right.
For the first 100 years, we were just bought and paid for by whoever could buy and pay for us. So the canons of journalism are only 100 years old. And so the question becomes, ethically, do you stick to those, or whether young people are, as you get into the profession, whether you're going to have to kind of ebb and flow and bend? I hope that's not the case. I'm so old now that I can sit here and tell everybody, what my decision would be. Ethically, I got to look at myself in the mirror every night, and by just telling the truth, that's how I make it through the day. But I think that this new generation, those of you in the audience that are considering a career in journalism, either print or broadcasting, and with social media, just the pressure of social media being so instantaneous, challenging your truth, maybe there are going to be new ways for you to navigate that. Yeah. But journalism folds. Journalism as we know it ends the minute we can no longer tell the truth. That's just the bottom line. And unfortunately, when one of the major political parties now is making it fashionable to simply ignore reality and ignore the truth, that puts an enormous pressure moving forward.
So, do you think some journalists have become desensitized or numb to that kind of rhetoric?
It's an excellent question, and I still have quite a few colleagues that are in the business. And sometimes when I get on my high horse and I leave Facebook comments or do YouTube podcasts on this topic, I get a little bit of pushback saying you're not in it, you don't understand the dynamics anymore. But, at the end of the day, either as a journalist covering this, we're going to give people factual information or we're not. And to repeat that a politician is lying is not a bad thing. I don't think. But I'm also not in the shoes of individuals who are now maybe getting some pressure from upstairs, from the general manager's office, who's putting pressure on the news director, who's putting pressure on producers, that, we need a little less fact-checking here. Or we need to, the new thing is to surround fact-checking with a fancy headline. Only do fact-checking within fact-checking.
Mm-hmm.
Simply stating the truth is too extreme. Save that for fact-checking. And so I don't know whether individuals are desensitized to it or whether they're just under a pressure to move on. And it's dangerous, Amy, as you know, in journalism, it's dangerous to move on. Mm-hmm. How many times does a politician, and that's what Donald Trump is, by the way, he's a former president and he's the nominee of a party, he's a politician. So like any other politician we've ever covered, ever, on whatever political party that they happen to be, the question becomes, at what point do you stop calling a lie a lie? And in my opinion, journalistically, that's never. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is we're either here to tell the truth the way that the facts present themselves, or we're not. And but that is going to be, a real challenge. I think in the post-Trump era, it will be interesting to see who the Republicans put up to fill that Trump void. Trump has a lot of charisma. He's Teflon. He gets away with a lot. And that's people that like him love that. People who try to hold his feet firm, hate that. But Trump is Trump. He's a personality that was well known before he stepped into politics. I don't know that the Republicans are going to be able to get away with all of this when Trump exits the stage. And we might return to more normalcy at that point. We'll have to wait and see.
So both camps have claimed that if the other is voted in, it'll be the end of democracy. One saying you won't even ever have to vote again, or they've both said you won't ever get to vote again. Is that normal campaign rhetoric?
No, and I don't think that, I think that you just have to, this kind of gets into a partisan area here, but I think you just have to look at the words that are being said. And in the case of Donald Trump, you can look at a record of 4 years. He lost the 2020 election. That is fact. There's no debate on that. And people who want to debate that, I mean, courts throughout all of the cases, his own appointed judges throughout cases, Fox News paid Dominion, the company that has a lot of the ballot boxes. Fox News paid Dominion about $1 billion to settle a lawsuit after they accused of Dominion of shenanigans, which wasn't true. I mean, we now know the truth. And so I think a lot of Republicans that are friends of mine just kind of shrug that off and say, well, that's Trump being Trump. And so they let it go because that's their guy, that's the leader of their team. But, he lost the election, and then January 6th happened. And I never want to see those scenes again from either political party or for any other politician. To see barricades ransacked, to see one of the most distinguished buildings in America ransacked, and having individuals die, police officers hurt, all in an attempt to get Vice President Pence not to certify the electoral count, the Electoral College count. That's what that was all about, was trying to stop Pence from doing his constitutional duty on January 6th. And as a journalist, we all know that what the intent there was is that if they could get Pence to just delay that count by a day, it would throw it into the courts. And it would have created such havoc, and who knows how that would have all fallen out, but it would have given President Trump more time to try to figure out a way to stay, even though he had lost the election. That's dangerous. And that happened. That's just factually happened. And so, moving forward, when you hear these questions about democracy surviving, I don't think it's partisan to say, okay, well, we saw what happened on January 6th. That's already a taste of what we're talking about. What will the next thing be? And so I think that it's a relevant topic in this particular election cycle. But that said, Amy, I think that most Americans have already decided. The people that are listening in the auditorium tonight to me, you've already decided one way or the other. And so, you're either nodding in agreement or shaking your head and just, this election is going to come down to voters that could fit into a football stadium.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how many truly undecided voters there are in about 6 states.
Yeah.
And those individuals are I don't think they're going to be scared with the democracy argument. I think that they're aware of it. I don't think that it overrides their questions about the economy, inflation, and particularly grocery prices when they go to the grocery store.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to open it up. So if anybody has a question they want to ask Jim, if you could go ahead and head up here so that we can quickly, switch places. But I do want to kind of balance it out a little bit here, Jim, and ask, do you think journalists are holding Kamala accountable? Do you think they are, as fair in their coverage? Are they holding her feet to the fire?
No. The fact that she gives so few interviews, she's doing more talk shows now. But what I always hated, and this strategy developed back 2008, Barack Obama did it, and in 2016, Hillary Clinton, who I covered a lot in 2008, she wasn't giving interviews to credentialed press. I hate it. I don't know what, particularly these politicians at the national level, I've said this so many times, Amy, and I know you've heard it, but what are they scared of? I mean, if you're vice president of the United States, honestly, you're at a level of a politician that shouldn't be scared of Jim Heath. It shouldn't be scared of local reporters. And so it's frustrating, it's aggravating. I think that for Harris, I'm not trying to justify it because I don't think there's justification in the lack of access that she's provided and the lack of press conferences that she's had. In my opinion, there should always be more. I'd like to see them daily, quite frankly. John McCain was famous for that. John McCain was fearless of the press. And he would allow the press in his bus. He'd have us in the back of the bus just chatting whatever was going on. He was fearless. And I always thought that was the example that all of these national politicians should follow. If you're a school board member or a city councilman or a mayor or a state legislator, you're a little green. You're not used to press questions or the way things can be framed based on your answers. And then I can kind of understand trying to give it some time. But being inaccessible at the national level, to Harris's defense, she didn't know she was going to be the nominee, quite frankly. She was thrust into the nomination. I think they're doing the best they can to do this dance where make no mistakes. And part of making mistakes is saying something that you shouldn't in a conversation like we're having right now, like Mitt Romney did with me back in 2012. But as a journalist, I can tell you, I don't think it's the right strategy. And I hate that. I hate the lack of access.
Hi, Jim. I've been teaching journalism here since 1986.
Wow.
So I've seen, I know. So I'm probably older than you and have watched all of the political campaigns that you've referenced. And as I was looking at all the people you interviewed for your books, the one who comes that hits me most to the heart is John McCain, as you just mentioned. And he was indeed a fearless man who stood up for truth. If by some miracle you could talk to him again today, not necessarily to publish it, but what would you talk to him about now?
Oh, well, thanks for the question. And on a side note, I was involved in politics before I got into professional broadcasting, into starting my broadcast journalism career. And I grew up in Arizona, and I worked on John McCain's first run for Congress in 1982 as a teenage Republican. And I knew him politically before I got into broadcasting. And then, as luck would turn out, I ended up in South Carolina, covered his 2008 campaign a lot for a year. So it was always good to see him, and we had known each other, and I always had such respect for him. You know, his fearlessness with the press, as I mentioned, is something that I always point to other politicians. Like, why can't you be like that? You know, because he was just not afraid to speak his truth. It's not that he wasn't a politician, he was, and he did change his position on things, as politicians do, but he was always capable of defending it. And I think that it's not just me asking McCain, but I think the country would like to ask John McCain, how do we value heroes again? You know, how do we differentiate those that lie and manipulate to us against those that just want to lead us to a better place through example that they might not even be self-promoting? I think we've gotten away from that. I think it's dangerous for the country. Nationalism is never good. You cut yourself off from the rest of the world, and you start pounding your chest, and nationalism breeds a lot of bad things, as we know from history. And so I think a conversation with John McCain would be about honor, it would be about service to the country, and it would be about truth. What the whole topic is tonight in our conversation, it would be about telling the truth the best way that you can, and just standing up and taking the knocks for that. I understand it's always easier said than done. Young journalists that get into the profession today, you're going to be facing challenges that old guys like me, didn't have to face. But if we all agree generationally that the goal of journalism is to tell the truth, and to have politicians like McCain, who we know we're getting at least his truth, his version of truth on a regular basis, then this country is going to be a lot better off. I think we could use a lot more John McCains in the political arena. And just the other day, my brother was visiting, and I looked at my brother Mick, and I said, God, I miss him. And I do.
So, January 6th has come up a lot in this conversation. So, how do journalists prevent it from happening again?
Well, my first thought on that is that it's not really our responsibility to prevent it from happening again. It's our responsibility to report on who might be organizing it, who might think it's beneficial, who might be involved in it. But, elections have consequences. And as journalists, we just have to kind of follow what the mood of the country is. And if we have a case where there is a second Trump presidency, I think he's already spelled out some of the things he's going to do, which are going to challenge the norms. When you fire thousands of bureaucrats, as an example, sounds like a good idea to many Americans. But professional bureaucrats are hardworking people in a profession like anybody else who have an interest in the agencies that they work in. Not a lot of Americans have interest in a lot of the bureaucracy or a lot of the public policy things. And so when you start firing them randomly, you get them into a lawsuit to try to protect their job. But I think that a smart politician would know that a lot of people can't afford attorneys, particularly in this economy. It'd be the last thing that you afford. You can't afford a three-year legal fight over a job that's been gone for 3 years. So, and I think that's coming. I think there will be an Elon Musk recommendation to clear out bureaucrats in Washington. Bureaucrats has such a bad word. Government employees, professional government employees who know what they're doing in agencies that they've been working in and have an interest in. And I do think that we're going to see court cases on that are going to get rid of a lot of qualified people. We can report on that. We can tell those stories. And I think that that's the best way that we exercise our role, is just simply reporting on what's happening.
Do you think we missed it, Jim? Do you think journalists missed what was coming with January 6th?
Probably. But to our defense, had that ever happened before? You know, it's sometimes, you know, Trump is such an interesting figure, and I always try to, I just finished part 2 of a documentary that's premiering on my channel, I think on the 26th of this month. So I've spent a lot of time with the Donald Trump of 8 years ago. And it's so difficult because he's so celebrity driven. You know, he has a natural celebrity instinct about things. And it's very difficult to differentiate between the firm Trump that's standing in principle, that's going to do something 100%, regardless of what happens, and the, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Trump, who just says things in an effort to get a headline the next day or the news or whatever. And so as that was building up to January 6th, as he was denying that he lost, and as he was surrounding himself with strange people, Sidney Powell and these strange people that have all lost their law licenses now. These people that are telling him, well, if you go this route, if you just have Mike Pence refuse to certify the electoral count, then maybe we can take this to court and at least you'll get a delay on it. And you might not even have to move out on January 20th because the courts will still be deciding. When you get people like that around you, as a journalist looking in without access, you just don't know how serious that is. It turned out that it was very serious. You know, he wanted that delay. He wanted Pence to delay certifying the Electoral College. Constitutionally, that has to be done on January 6th. There's no provision about what happens if it isn't. And that was the point. You know, now we can take it to court and we can challenge it. We can reopen it, perhaps even call for another election because we missed the constitutional deadline of January 6th. Pence didn't go along with it. I think J.D. Vance would. So this next time around, I think we're going to be a lot more sensitive to what's being said, and we're going to take things a lot more seriously and point out the ramifications. At the end of the day, the American people are going to do what they do. And the press can't control that other than report on what happens and leave that to them to make a decision on what they think about it.
Hi, Jim. This is I'm teaching communication classes.
Hi.
I have my students here. We are doing a speech on social media literacy. So basically, we want to know how social media use can impact our college students' knowledge on news creation. So I know because as a journalism as an industry, maybe feel a lot of pressure of using social media. So, but we can see even legitimate source journalism, they have to use the social media for reporting news. So my question is, as an educator, what kind of tips can we provide for our college students when they're consuming news from different platforms of the social media, like TikTok? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that if we could just instill from a young age at this point moving forward that you need to be skeptical of the source of the information. If you can educate generationally young people to be skeptical so that when they see on TikTok some edited highlight, and I love TikTok too. I'm watching all the time and I'm amazed how people are making money on TikTok, which is fascinating. If anybody wants to do a battle later, let me know. That's a TikTok thing. But if you know instinctively that as you're scrolling through that clip, might not be in its entirety, or it might be, just part of something larger that you should be interested in. If you have an instinct for that, then I think we'll be okay. Right now, I think we're in a time period where people literally are seeing a clip and they literally think that's the factual part of it. And that's where we get into trouble. It also squeezes credentialed journalists. It comes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. How long is a journalist going to be allowed to be paid to just simply fact check and tell the truth? What will the pressure be like on corporate interests who might be looking at something like TikTok or social media and see that there's better revenue generated by the sensational or by the quick or something that isn't necessarily completely true. So all of those pressures are going to weigh on our professional journalists. I call them credentialed journalists. Moving forward, people call it the mainstream media. I call it credentialed journalism. I prefer that term. I wish that we in the business would use that term. Credential media. These are individuals that have the credentials from a news organization that is respected for going out and fact checking. I think that one other thing on this, you know, journalism's best moment is local.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a local official that's embezzling, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and your local paper or your local TV station, like a pit bull, goes after that and unravels it, that's where I think our best moments come locally, is when we uncover wrongdoing and we save taxpayers, in this case, money for uncovering that. And I think we should do a much better job professionally of highlighting that on social media to let people know the differential between, you know, who, what, why, where, and when. Reporters that are actually taking the time to get double sourced and all of the information compared to just random clips that might be on social media. It's a tricky time period, but I have a great deal of confidence in young people. I think that's going to be navigated, but it is part of the toolbox now. Mm-hmm. You know, back in the day, there were newspapers, and then radio came along, and that changed the dynamic. Then television came along, and now we're in the social media internet age. But I think younger generations will be able to navigate it and use it to their advantage to help.
Mm-hmm. For the record, Jim, I think journalists should have SEALs like meteorologists do. So
I love that idea.
yeah, I think it would be great, and that's my idea. Okay. I want to. Does anybody else have a question for Jim? You'd like to ask? No. So when we're talking about journalism and democracy, and I asked you the question about, you know, democracy and if we're going to lose it, do you think we're in danger? Do you think free press in the U.S. is in danger?
I think that people in power with resources have always been a threat to journalism. So I don't necessarily think the threat is new. I'll give you an example. There's a guy in West Virginia. His name is Bill Blankenship. He's a billionaire. He's the Donald Trump of West Virginia. And he owned a coal mine in West Virginia, of which several miners ended up dying in an accident, tragic accident. He went to prison over it for a little while. But the prison sentence that he served was on a misdemeanor charge, not a felony. He ended up getting out of jail. He ran for the U.S. Senate in West Virginia. This is probably 6 years ago. 6 years ago. I had never covered West Virginia politics ever. I have a Twitter account that at the time had 16 or 17,000 followers. Not a big Twitter account on the scale of things. But on election day in West Virginia, from Arizona, I tweeted out that Bill Blankenship, the felon who went to prison for the deaths at his mine, you know, is going to lose today, because it was clear by all the polling that he was going to lose, and he was going to lose big, which he did. About 6 months later, there was a knock on the door. Again, here in Arizona, at the end of the earth, 100 billion degrees, and there's a knock on the door, and a process server hands me a document that was as thick as a book. And I said, "What is this?" And she looked and she said, "Well, it appears that you're part of a lawsuit from a fellow named Bill Blankenship, who is suing every single journalist in America who accused him of being a felon." And so I took that, and luckily one of my best friends here in town that I grew up with was an attorney. I said, "Look, I can't pay you for this, but I'm going to need attorney protection." Bill Blankenship sued 3 pages worth of journalists, including Dan Rather and CBS News and Fox News and Judge Napolitano at Fox News, and Jim Heath was near the end of the list, one might say. But because of that one tweet, where I accused him of being a felon when in fact he went to prison on a misdemeanor charge. He included me on a massive lawsuit. It lasted 2 years. I could not get myself removed from this lawsuit. Ended up paying thousands of dollars in legal fees because I had to answer to the court in legal terms. Now, I tell you all of this as a warning. I never mentioned Bill Blankenship again. And 4 years ago, he was the Constitution Party's candidate for president of the United States. And I so badly wanted to mention Bill Blankenship and how awful I personally think he is. But I didn't. I held off. I backed off because I had this cloud of a lawsuit. And even though I knew that I had a First Amendment right to tweet whatever I wanted about a politician, it made me question whether it was worth it or not. Do I stir the pot? Do I poke the bear any more than he's been poked? And I came to the conclusion commenting on him or his candidacy for president was not worth it. But that is the type of thing where powerful people can go after journalists and put you in a position where you've got a family at home, you've got a spouse, and you've got kids to feed, you've got your own life going on outside of your career as a journalist. And if these individuals actually go through with their threats of going after people, then it puts a cloud as a journalist that is very dramatic and very sensitive. So I tell that story. I've never told that story publicly. I've never even done a YouTube. I was going to do a YouTube video on it, but it was like, don't poke the bear, don't poke the bear. But I share that with you because I'm a bit embarrassed. I've told people I'm a bit embarrassed about how that made me rethink of my coverage of that billionaire because you get hit with a lawsuit over one tweet. And I think that can happen more and more, and I think that that's a problem that journalists, we've always faced it from the powerful. But I think now people are making it clear what can happen over the next 4 years if there's any dissent or any disagreement, and that being under the threat of a lawsuit is financially painful.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us as we wrap things up?
Guardians of the truth. That's just what I think the profession is. And I think that that's the goal. That's the mission. If we want to continue with the canons of journalism, which are now 100 years old, then we're going to have the support of corporations that are strong enough to have the truth told, and we're going to have journalists who understand, even if they take a lot of flack on social media, that at the end of the day, when you look in the mirror, if you've told the truth as you have discovered it based on facts, or whether that all is going to bend and we're going to go back to like we were the first 100 years of our country, where basically partisan interests run all of the media. People can just simply go to their partisan entity, and that's their reality, that's their world, and that's what they depend on, is what they think, is what they know, and that's all they are interested in. We're at a very interesting moment in American history where journalism, there's nothing in the Constitution that protects us. We call ourselves the fourth estate, but we've had to earn that title over the last 100 years because we certainly didn't have it the first 100 years of our country. And so it's going to be up to you, guardians of the truth. Sounds like a movie, but is that label going to be important? Is it going to be upheld in the years ahead? I'm an optimist, so I think it will be. I think you're all going to do a great job. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I've had so many trips to Wapakoneta, Neil Armstrong Museum, all of my relatives growing up in Van Wert. I love that part of the state, and I only wish that I could send you a little bit of this warmer weather for a little while longer before you get into holiday winter weather. But,
Me too.
Go Bucks.
I was not happy. I had to get out the winter jacket today. Jim, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing your experiences with us. We'll continue to watch your electoral map predictions on your YouTube channel, as
we
well
have
as
we have a change coming, so probably tomorrow.
little teaser.
Little teaser.
Yeah, and we'll look for the part 2 of the documentary too. The first part was just really good at breaking things down, and I know you have the second part coming up October 26th. Thank
Really
you all
proud of,
for.
really proud of it. Part 2 is really, really good. It will
Oh,
take
good.
people back, and it's amazing how much has happened between then and now.
Yes, great. Thank you all for coming. We have another Wilkin Series event coming up at the end of the month, October 29th, during Rock the mock election on campus. This will be the third one we've done. But we will have Colleen Marshall, who's a longtime award-winning anchor at Channel 4 in Columbus. In fact, this year she's celebrating 40 years, or this week she's celebrating 40 years there. But she'll be here on campus to talk to us some more about journalism and democracy that day at noon in the Writing Center in the CBSL. So again, thank you, Jim. You have a vast amount of experience, and I'm so glad that you shared it with us today. Thank you.
See you later.